Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I make it 10 o'clock. Thank you very much for coming. It's great to see so many people for our first meeting of Overview and Scrutiny. You're all very welcome. It's Thursday, the 8th of June. We'll make a start with the agenda. So, item 1, minutes. These are the minutes from our meeting held on the 22nd of March. Those of you that were here pre-election, are you content that they're a true record? Yep. Thank you very much. I shall sign those. Item 2 then, apologies and substitutes. I know there's a couple of apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. I've received apologies from Councillor Wickerson, and we've got Councillor Atterwill standing in as a substitute. I don't know if you've had any more.
Councillor Nunn, apologies as well.
Councillor Nunn, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Item 3, Chairman's announcements. None for today. We've got a fairly packed agenda, so we'll crack on with that. No urgent business that I'm aware of. Does anybody have any declaration of any interest, please, that they wish to declare? Fabian.
Yeah, just for the record, because obviously we've got Norfolk County Council hedge cutting. I'm also a county councillor within Breckland.
Okay. It might be a I'm Spartacus moment, but yeah, absolutely. I'm a county councillor as well, equally interested in grass cutting, as is Claire Bowes, so we'll just make a note of those. Thank you. If anyone has any other interests as we go through, please do shout. Item 6, non-members wishing to address the meeting. You're all very welcome. Thank you very much. And then move on to items proper. I'm going to move it around slightly because we've got some outside guests with us today. So I'm going to take item 9 first, which is the Norfolk County Council grass verges and maintenance issues raised at full council and by email by a number of members, so I thought this was quite a pertinent issue. Very pleased to welcome David Jacklin with us today. I think most of us will probably be familiar with David, and Luke Denny, Area Support Engineer as well. You're very welcome. I'm going to hand over to you guys. I know you've got a presentation for us, which jumped up on screen like magic. Thank you. So we'll take your presentation, folks, and then we'll move on to questions. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, thanks for inviting us. My name's David Jacklin. I'm the Area Manager for South Area of Highways, Norfolk County Council. This is my colleague Luke Denny, who's our Area Support Engineer. We came here today to talk a little bit about what we do and to address some of the issues that you've raised, like the grass verges, etc., that we're responsible for in maintenance of the highways. I'm not sure how well you can see this. This is the map of Norfolk. You can see the different areas are shaded slightly different colours. So, for example, the blue is the south area. This is broken down into 4 sectors, and some of you will be familiar with the highway engineers that manage each sector. So, for example, in the South 4, which covers Dereham, Attleborough and Watton, that's Matt Lyons. And in the corner there you can see the teams belonging to each area. So there is a point of contact depending on which sector that you operate from. So the South Area Office, for example, has 30 staff, South Highways client team. We have some Norse management staff sharing our offices. They look after the road workers and the management of the work that they carry out for us. There's 3 business support staff. There's a breakdown on the screen there of the gangs that we have that work for North Highways. We cover over 200 parishes between the sectors, and that includes about 3,000 kilometres of highway network. The work carried out by the team is highway routine inspections, maintenance, identification and delivery, the management of the network, which is our streetworks function and includes the permitting, structural maintenance, which is identification of schemes and following those schemes through, parish partnership funding streams like the local member fund, parish partnership scheme, Road Safety Community Fund, which is for traffic management issues, and advice and liaison. We also carry out, during the winter months, the winter service, the management of the gritters, the public rights of way inspections and maintenance, and we also carry out a function of out-of-hours highways emergency response, which I believe Luke is on duty this week.
I am on duty this week, so yeah.
So how we identify the maintenance works is through our inspections. We have dedicated highway inspectors driven about in some spec'd-up vans who identify defects that they see and programming them into tablets and prioritise them. And we also have technicians who carry out reactive inspections, generally from third parties like the general public, councillors, members, parish councils, who identify works that we then inspect and programme any defects as necessary. We respond to customer service requests, and we do quite a lot of liaison with the district councillors, county councillors, parish, town councils, and members of the public. So we maintain the highway in accordance with Norfolk County Council's Transport Asset Management Plan. That's quite a lengthy document. It is available on our website. Many, many pages of what we do and how we do it. That is what we work to. The scheduled highway inspections and defect identification, identify and prioritise structural maintenance schemes, footway refurbishment, new drainage schemes, surfacing, road strengthening schemes, resurfacing, surface dressing, all that type of stuff. The public interface for the highways group. We are the first point of contact in area, so we'd take on all the inquiries, and if it's not something that we would deal with, we will signpost people to more relevant sections. We design and delivery of minor maintenance schemes in area. We do also have a locality designer who can put together some schemes on behalf of the highway engineers, and we can deliver those out in the area. We carry out an audit of the state roads, the developer schemes, any that we are potentially going to adopt. We would carry out the supervision of those builds. We do surface dressing and surface dressing prep, getting the roads ready and supervise the works. Make the winter decisions, winter maintenance decisions based on the weather forecasts, and making sure we've got all the routes running at the right times. And we also, like mentioned earlier, the streetworks function, network management and the permitting is carried out in area as well. On the screen is quite a long list of the work types that we do in area with the maintenance functions. As you can see, the topical ones at the moment, the potholes, the grass cutting, which we'll go on to in a short while. So the grass verge cutting, Norfolk's roadside verges are only cut for safety reasons, not for appearance. There are different grass cutting schedules for our roads. So we cut the grass verges along main A and B classified roads twice between May and September each year. The C and U roads will be cut once, followed by the safety cut at a visibility splays if required and subject to the growth. So we had a bit of a drought last season, so that reduced the cutting regime somewhat. The urban roads are typically cut 4 times a year, depending on the growing season, and areas maintained on the county council's behalf by other local councils may see more frequent cuts. The roadside nature reserves are individually managed by the environment team. They benefit the plants and animals that live within the verges, and they are posted and signposted so that the grass cutters know they are there. And National Highways maintain the A11 and the A47, so it's not something that my team deal with. Many people, certainly on social media, mention the No Mow May. This initiative by Plant Life to encourage garden growers and green space managers to increase the flower-rich meadows and benefit wildlife. NCC roadside verge cutting starts in mid-May to be able to service the whole of Norfolk after a period of fast vegetative growth. There is an ongoing effort to review the council's verge cutting regime, which is due in summer 2024. roadside nature reserves, which touched on previously, protected verges that manage separately from the wider verge network. These verges are managed with specialised expertise and in the ecologically sensitive manner. Norfolk County Council has committed to increase the number of roadside nature reserves from 111 to 300 by next autumn. Our efforts are underway to do this and will continue throughout this summer and next. Any new roadside nature reserves identified would be subject to the current R management. This means they will not be cut until September, and the horizons will be removed to ensure and maintain the highest quality. The difference being with them that they do collect the horizons in a managed way, which we don't do with the rest of the verge cutting. Some recent grass issues locally. Raised with contractor, they should be blowing the horizons back onto the grass areas from the footways and from the road to prevent these clogging up the road gullies. We're looking to go beginning of May next year, weather dependent. Again, it's difficult for us to decide when best to start the grass cutting. I think generally speaking, from this year, we're going to go earlier next season. Until 2021, Breckland Council cut high urban grass within the Breckland area and the market towns under the delegated service agreement until the summer of 2021. We had discussions with Breckland Council regarding the future of the above agreement due to Norfolk County Council need to reduce their cutting frequency. So we were reducing from 5 cuts per year to 4. And at the same time, Breckland's were renewing their contract with Serco, which meant their costs increased at a time when we were looking to reduce costs. And unfortunately, we had to move away from that agreement, that long-standing agreement, and use our own contractor to then carry out the urban cuts in the Breckland market towns. So here's some specific questions that were put to us recently for this meeting. The Nar Valley tarmac made aware of specific issues which are raised above. Horizons to be blown back onto the verges. We do ask they leaf blow all the footways and channels to keep them clear. Trimming should be done around the street furniture. I raised this. I had a meeting with tarmac yesterday, and I did raise this as an issue, so they're aware of that. Missed sections left due to wildflowers. Apart from the missed site which the subcontractor returned to and cut, and hydrants have markers to highlight. What I would say on that one is it's difficult for the grass cutters to know whether they cut any flowers and leave the whole grassed area looking neat and tidy, or do they leave the flowers and cut around them with the risk of leaving it looking more unkempt. So that's always a difficult decision for them to make. They tend to get criticised whichever way they do it. If it's left looking slightly untidy, the flowers are there, the flowers are cut to make it tidy, then criticised for cutting the flowers. So they are in a difficult position on that type of decision. There is a question on the underpass, and there is an underpass slide to come. Patching requirements past the local highway team to inspect and programme repairs as necessary. Report defects, question 3 there, including as much description as possible to assist local highways teams to prioritise defects accordingly. Yeah, that's just when reporting it, just as much detail as you can always helps the teams. There's a slide on potholes. The 5-year average is about 7,050. 3 times more spent on prevention than the reactive repairs. County-wide patching pothole budget of 8.2 million, 10.7 million surface dressing to seal roads during the fine weather months, seal them up ready for the winter and the weather. Inspectors proactively inspect the highway and technicians reactively respond to customer inquiries and third-party defects. We've received an additional 6.35 million in pothole repair funding from the government, which is the 3rd largest in England. And some of that money has gone to extend the surface dressing regime this season. Various treatment types: hot rolled asphalt, the hot box, spray injection patching are some of the methods we use to treat the potholes out there on the network. Underpasses and subways, the Dereham near the rugby field, it's actually a National Highways asset. NCC Highways has cleaned it without prejudice on the 17th of May due to local concerns. It's a difficult one because National Highways not too interested in maintaining that asset, and we had to intervene on this occasion. The Thetford Subway, London Road, cleaned May 2023, and the Brandon Road, the local highway team is inspecting that, and we'll add to the drainage hit team to check. Keep an eye on that one to just check that that is clear prior to any heavy downpours that we're warned about. Slide on speed limits. Changes to street scene, development led. The developer finances any necessary speed limit changes via the planning process. Goes hand in hand with any significant changes to the street scene usually. The speed-related accident history may lead to review by the network safety team. So if there's speed-related accidents, they may create measures to try and improve that. The Road Safety Community Fund allows traffic management issues to be reviewed and changes made if deemed appropriate. They started in West, they're currently in North. The emails for the South area have gone out now, last Friday I believe, and then finally the City. They're the areas which are one per year, so South will be year 3. This is an extract from our Transport Asset Management Plan, which just gives an indication of the priority timings that we work to. And this screen is a screenshot of an extract from the TAM, which highlights how the inspectors would go about prioritising certain types of defects. And there's many of these within the TAM. So it gives you an indication of the depth of a pothole, the type of road, and what priority that would be given to the repairs. So that's how we reach those decisions on how quickly we go to repair something. Many of you might have heard of the Norfolk Strategic Flood Alliance. They're dedicated gangs to deal with flooding issues. We try and, when we hear about some inclement weather coming in, we'll try and give them the warning so they can go out and check all the drainage hotspots, if you like, and try and clear any gullies, anything covered in leaves, mud, etc., and try and clear those up, expecting the heavy rain. Drainage crews will liaise closely with client teams to report back any findings and suggest additional measures, requirements for either routine maintenance repairs or longer-term capital improvements. The gangs will complement existing jetting and gully emptying gangs. We have been trying a similar arrangement in South area where teams have been directing an identified gang to deal with flooding reports, and just finalising the back office arrangements and looking at enhanced out-of-hours protocols, instruction for the hotspot locations, Okay, next slide, please. So, as I said before, the south area is broken into the 4 sectors, and each sector has a highway engineer who manages that sector, and they have 2 technicians and an inspector to help them deliver the maintenance of those areas. They have somewhere in the region of 60 to 70 parishes each, and so to help us by reporting it, you can report via the usual phone to the call centre, email to customer service centre. You will receive a unique inquiry number to help you track those inquiries, or you can do it, the preferred method really is online, creating yourself an online account, and then if you report it online, you'll be updated from the teams that have been out to site and looked at it, and they can add some information to help you see where we're at with it. Now, inspect and programme as necessary. This is a screenshot of Norfolk County Council's website, which helps you determine where your defect's going to go. It will channel it to the different elements there, the potholes, drainage, for example, hedges and trees, etc. So that it's quite easy to follow if you get onto the Norfolk County Council website and so you report a highway defect, you'll start to be channeled through these tabs. I think there's another screenshot as well on the next slide of a breakdown of, I don't know how well you can see it on the screen, but a breakdown of the different elements again. So it helps you to navigate. There was a question about reporting different types of defects. So this is how you do it. It sort of makes it quite easy to follow through. And here's online some contact information from us. All right, thanks very much. So obviously open to any questions on any of that. Or
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, David. It's really useful. If you're happy, we'll circulate those slides as well. So I think there's a lot of sort of detailed information there, and that would be good to sort of digest. Questions? Roger, you were quick. Question from yourself.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions, if I can. So to start off with the verge cutting, particularly around road junctions. In my ward, in the Lincoln ward, which is the villages north of Dereham, most of the complaints I'm getting is about the state of the road junctions from a safety aspect. And I think everybody is basically saying to me, why aren't they coming 5 or 6 weeks earlier to cut those junctions? Because that is a serious safety issue in some instances. So is that something that you look to address next year? Because that definitely needs to be done. And then my next question really is, I'd like you to explain to me, talk to me about the life of a pothole. I'd like to understand the process. So a pothole appears in the road and a resident or the parish council basically fills in your online form, sends that in and says there's this pothole. Now what I'd like to understand now is what is the process from that moment and how many personnel are involved in managing the process of that pothole from you going out and inspecting it to your contractor doing some work to it and then completion. Because from what I can understand, there seems to be an awful lot of management involved, where actually what we need in this county is more people with shovels and the tools to do the job. So I'd like to understand that process. I'd also like to understand why it is that you come into a village, so there's a pothole been reported. I've seen it several times in my own village with my own eyes. A pothole's reported to you and your guys come out and you repair that pothole, but in the 12 weeks it's taken you to come out and repair that pothole, there's 2 or 3 that have appeared in the vicinity around it, you know, clearly some of them within a couple of metres, but they don't repair them ones when they come to site. They have to be reported separately. Surely common sense would dictate, if you've got a crew out there, you do all the potholes that have been reported in the village in one go, and if there's others in the immediate vicinity of the ones that have been reported, it would make sense to me to repair those while I was there. So I think I'd like to understand the management process and I suppose the contractual process you have with your contractor, Norse. Over to you guys.
right, I'll address the verges one to start with, and then I'll let Luke talk a bit about the potholes, if that's okay. So, as I mentioned in the slides, the cutting regime certainly has been reduced from county for savings. Where we cut the urban grass 5 times per season, we've now gone down to 4 times. So if you can imagine, we've got to try and make those 4 cuts count. That's quite difficult to know exactly when best to go, because you've got one less to do. So we've looked at this season and we've agreed that next season we will go out earlier just to get that first cut in. But that's the reality is we're trying to do the whole season with 4 cuts rather than 5. And I agree that there has been some quite long grass on in some of our verges, and that is a consequence of us having to try and make those 4 cuts last over the whole of the season. We can't predict the weather. We were quite lucky last year with the drought. We didn't have to go so often, but this season the grass did shoot up, and next year we'll be looking to go earlier. So hopefully that's covered off that one.
Can I just follow up on that, Chair? So just to confirm, you're telling me that your guys are cutting all the road junctions 4 times a year, and that includes the junctions on outside of urban areas on A and B roads?
No, so the rural cutting is outside of the towns, etc. And that is done, a full cut is done early in the season on the A, Bs, C and U roads. And then later in the season, they'll go back and do the A and B roads and some of the junction splays around the C and U roads. But we don't do a full cut twice like we used to do. So that regime has been reduced also.
I was going to say, I'll obviously touch on the potholes query. I appreciate that that's sort of fairly topical as well. So your query is sort of the lifespan of pothole becoming a pothole through to it being done. Obviously, identification can be sort of made through different channels. The inspectors pick up on their inspection regime. If they identify a pothole, they will obviously program it. Like Dave said, there was the tampon screen, which again, PDF version, there's literally hundreds of pages on there, but there are stipulations on there that say a pothole of this size is programmed at this priority, and that gives it a time scale of anywhere normally between 4 days if it's quite a deep one, if it's come out quite rapidly, through to 84 days, which is a priority D, the lowest priority effectively. Obviously that may change from identification to the time that's got to the contractors that are going to carry it out. We normally get notified of changes to potholes via the online reporting system, or people calling through the call centre sort of saying it's been reported before, however it's got worse. That will often then, there will be a reactive inspection to that, and the priority can change, so someone can go out and say, actually, yeah, this has changed, we need to do this as a priority B, get out there in 4 days to repair that. You obviously mentioned as well that other potholes may open in the time. 1 pothole's reported, by the time a gang's got there to repair those, another 2 may have opened. The process should be that contractors, obviously, they have the ability to call the identifier and say, the works order we've got here states there's 10 metres on this road to fill the marked potholes, which again, the potholes should be marked by the identifier. Sometimes they'll be there when it's wet and it's quite difficult to put the marks down. The road worker that's carrying out that work does have the ability to call the identifier and state there's 10 metres on this ticket, however, there's an extra sort of 5 that's here. Are you happy for us to carry that out? And that correspondence should then be between the identifier and they'll give the go-ahead for them to do that. That should happen. Doesn't always happen. It might be a case that the identifier is for whatever reason uncontactable. There's a little bit of sort of discrepancy that the contractors then should call someone like myself. I'm not going to be overly familiar with that works order. I wasn't there to see the original thing, but often I will take the word of what they're saying. They're experienced road workers. They know what they're doing. If they're telling me that there's extra meterage, I'd give the go-ahead for that, and they should then do that. It might often be the case that we've just not been notified of it, and that might be the reason that sometimes potholes might get missed.
Just quickly, Roger, if you've got a follow-up.
So you didn't really answer my question about how much management's involved in identifying the pothole, going out and inspecting it, putting a white line around it, doing the work. Then I presume somebody has to go out and inspect it again to make sure the work's been done before the payment can be made to the contractor. Does, in the Norse contract, because it is Norse that repairs the potholes for you now, do they get an attendance fee for each works order? Because I think that's quite important, because that might be a reason why they're not doing the other bits while they're on site, because they might be thinking, well, we'll wait for another works order because we get more money for that. Is that how it works?
Not really, no. Like Luke said, we would expect if there was additional potholes on the road to what they had on the work ticket, we would expect them to call the identifier to say that. Regarding the management, there isn't a great deal of management involved with it. However that pothole has been identified, whether it's us finding it or a member of the public reporting it, generally speaking, if it's somebody else, the techs will go out and look at it. They will decide whether it's at intervention level. They will put that onto their tablets the same as the inspectors do. And then that sits, Luke runs the reports weekly. The engineers go through all their works on the system and select that work, who then Luke would issue that to the contractor. There isn't a great deal of management. They then, once they receive it, their end, they'll send the gangs out. And but it is based on priority. So if you do see some fairly minor potholes on a rural network, and you think they've taken a while to fix, that's probably because of the priority they're given. So I hope that's...
Okay, thank you. I've got quite a few hands, and I'm keen for as many members to ask questions as possible, so I'm going to take them in pairs and then let you respond. So the next two, I've got Peter first and then Harry, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming into the Lions Den today. And when you was the local engineer for us in Nar Valley, David, we did get things done, must say that. My point was, and it was in my question, does North subcontract any of the work out to subcontractors? Because there's a rumour that CGM are doing Nar Valley. And with that as well, the quality of work is poor. Some of it's not been completed. On the main road in Narborough, for instance, which you know is the old A47 bus route, halfway down the road they stopped cutting, didn't go further on to the ship corner, as we call it, to cut round the sign, which I know is highways, and that's a junction as well. Obviously it could come into impacting motorists' visual safety issues. So there's that point. There's no blowing back off the roads or off the pavements, and there's no strimming round the street furniture, fire hydrants, for instance, and that sort of thing. So the quality of the work is a big thing. Do you come out and monitor the work that's been done by your contractor, which I would if I had a business? I'd be following that up, and I believe we do. Our team would have done that in Breckland with our contractors. And the pothole thing is as well, quality work again, which you can see for yourself coming in on the Tesco, what we call the Tesco roundabout, the poor quality of work there. I never can't get my head round why a contractor, and if I was there, why can't you square the hole off, make it that little bit deeper, and then fill it properly, and then seal the edges while you're there? That's going to be a 2-year repair. At the moment, we're getting 3 months, 6 months repair possibly before you need to come back again.
Okay,
You know,
thank you.
logically to me, that is where contracts should be saving you money.
Thank you, Peter. And Harry?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman. Microphone's on, I hope. Thank you very much for your presentation and coming along. That's very, very helpful. If I can pick up on one issue first, it's around the grass cuttings. We had some helpful discussions at the last overview and scrutiny commission, and we talked about who cut what and when. This is also partly a question for Breckland. One of the things I did notice in your presentation, which was helpful, as you know, there's quite a lot of activity in social media in terms of clippings and the risings, and I know that different officers through Rihanna and others have raised that where there hasn't been any blowback onto verges, potentially blocking up gullies, etc. I did notice that the minutes of the last scrutiny committee, the Environmental Services manager was going to look at how the mapping system could be potentially linked with a digital team, so that one of the issues that councils have is who owns what, etc. So regardless of which contractor is actually carrying this out, whether it's Circle or not, so that it will actually save officer time, but also help us respond to residents more quickly if we're directing and signposting them. So that's one issue. I'm very pleased that you've covered the issue of the underpasses. Underpasses by their nature are clues in the name. They're underpass generally under a road. They're generally going to be more liable to be in a slightly more remote place, potentially more liable to flooding, least liable to potentially inspection. There may also be ownership issues in terms of where it's national highways, and I know that you touched on clearing the underpass which is between the two urban wards of Dereham Topwood and Dereham Withburger, and the issue that we have there, which is well documented to the public, is when that floods, which it doesn't take much, it's repeated flooding, and the residents from both sides of the two different wards don't know that until they reach that point, and then sometimes they have to undertake a hazardous journey or not, either retrace their steps or go back across, and there's a recent bit in the media about somebody pushing someone in a trolley across there. Now I understand you cleared that recently without prejudice, and there's clearly work to be done outside the committee with Highways England, but also looking at the grill width there to take the water, whether there's a pump. I think there may be a pump involved there, but obviously other colleagues may have issues with those underpasses, but I won't go into my full 30 years of knowledge of it to hear about flooding, which is focusing on the underpass issue. So I know you may not have an easy answer on the underpass issue back today, but I hope that could be focused on, because that is something that does come up time and time again. But thank you for your efforts so far.
Lovely. Thank you, Harry. Would you like to respond to those, David?
Yes, thank you. Addressing the potholes by the Tesco roundabout, for example, was an overlay patching just to make that safe in the meantime, because I've spoken to the highway engineer who has got a surfacing scheme for this summer in mind to do. It's a very difficult location, as you can imagine, with Tesco's being open most of the time till about midnight. It used to be 24 hours. Trying to coordinate the best time to get in there and resurface it, but it's done properly. So that was like a temporary measure to tide that over, to be quite honest. You can't just go in there and cut it out and patch it in layered patching like you're suggesting, and without an awful lot of coordination with the businesses. With here, for example, everybody using this, there's a lot of service users going past that roundabout.
I wouldn't be particularly worried about the Tesco one, it's the villages.
Yeah, but that's an example of us having knowledge of what we have in mind, people seeing the overlay patching there and thinking, well, that's not a very good patch, but we know that's just to tide it over while we resurface the whole area, which people would consider a decent repair. So there's an element of that. What else do we have? The quality of the grass cutting. With the grass, that tends to be Tarmac, who is our main contractor that do the grass, and they do sub that out to subcontractors. Our supervisors, our technicians, will supervise their works, but what I would say is that if there is any quality issues, if you bring specifics to our attention, then we can always have an in-depth look at that and raise that again with Tarmac. And some of the issues there on the slides.
David, and I did it online as a villager, as a resident,
Okay.
as a council as well.
Yeah.
And I did get a response from the call centre, whoever takes that, and they did say they would pass it on to your...
Yeah, and they did say they were going to return to an area missed over there. Other than that, we do have regular meetings with both Norse and Tarmac, and any issues that I see that are coming into the teams, any general issues or specifics, I can raise those with either contractor. And those pictures you saw there of the horizons spilling out onto the junction, we did raise that with them, and they did say they should be blowing that back onto the grassed areas. So that's something that should improve. But if you see it's not happening, like the strimming around the furniture and the posts, etc., they should also be doing that. So if you notice that they've done the cut and they haven't returned to trim round the posts and the furniture, again, raise that with us, and we'll get them back out there. We have quite a good working relationship with the two contractors and their supervisors that supervise the gangs, so we can get in touch with them and tell them that they've missed this bit or not done that properly, and they should get out there and rectify it. Yeah, the underpasses, we have spoken about the underpasses. The one by the rugby club is actually a National Highways asset, but we haven't had much joy with them doing any maintenance to it, and it seems to fall upon my team to keep an eye on that and to clean the ACO channels and the gullies, and we did actually suck the water out of it recently without prejudice, like I said, and that's work in progress to try and get them to take some responsibility for that.
Okay, thank you. We've got Terry Land, please, and then Phil Cowan.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be brief. Two-part question, really, relating to the problems you're having after cutting the cuts from 5 times a year to 4 times a year. First question is, who made that decision to do it? And the second question is, how much money have you saved from doing that? Thank you.
I'll just let Phil ask his question first, David. Otherwise we'll never get through everyone.
Yeah, all right. Thank you, Chairman. I've got a question which I think might well be relevant to other parishes as well. But it seems that the system has become quite clunky. As you rightly say, there's a report it function on the website which is easy to use. Everyone can do it. But then you send a message to the parish clerks to say, oh, now, when the rangers are coming, can you gather together all of the details, please, and send it back to us? And not only that, when you're doing it in potholes, can you make sure you tell the rangers how big the pothole is, how deep it is, whether it's clear of water, on a public highway? Now, most of our clerks are working part-time, really part-time. They don't get paid to go and stand in the road and risk their lives. They're doing what you're asking them to do, the work which I think the county council team should be doing. Once a system is recorded online to say there's a pothole in X, Y and Z in a parish, that data should be collated by the county council and given to the rangers. It shouldn't be up to the parish clerk to then go back to the parish council, who may only meet every 6 or 8 weeks, to gather together all of the data again that you've already got, reported either by the public or by the parish council or by the parish clerk, for no reason. It just seems bizarre. And I have to say, as council taxpayers, our parishes and parish councillors and residents are getting pretty fed up with the poor quality of service and the fact that they're being asked to do your job. That's the message I've been asked to pass to you. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll come in with the first questions. Who made the decision to reduce grass cutting and how much did it save? So the officers within Norfolk County Council are all asked to put forward savings suggestions, and that goes to the members to agree those savings. The savings for the grass cutting for both the urban and the reduced rural is £100,000.
Okay, and one of you follow up on Phil's point there? Or?
Yeah, I think the point that was sort of being made, that might be referring to our ranger process that's dealt with in the south area.
That's correct.
The process it's been changed a few times over the years, but my understanding of the process is there's liaison ahead of the rangers' visits with the parishes, notification letter that will go out sort of saying our rangers will be visiting within a certain time period to obviously get the parish's expectations of small routine works that can be done, noted on our system ahead of time. I think the reference to sort of the process being quite clunky probably relates to, obviously, the inquiries being reported online does put them on our system. The extra steps within the ranger process, I think that the clunky reference probably relates to is asking for that information back in one email. What that allows the process to do is just specific follow-ups on those items raised, just to make sure that they have been looked at, work has been programmed, and then an update can be provided to those parishes so that they could be made aware, and perhaps even sort of they don't have to track that themselves on the specific items. Obviously, the online reporting system that we've got will give an inquiry number for each specific item. If you've reported 10 items as a parish, one email back to you after sending an email with those 10 inquiry numbers, one email back to say the status of each of those was sort of seen as a positive liaison from Norfolk County Council to those parishes to sort of say, thank you ever so much for your reported defects. This is what we've done, and they should be dealt with within X time period, to sort of save you having to track each individual item and sort of dealing with it for you as the time sort of goes on through it.
If I can just come in there as well, the whole Ranger process is an extra and over service for parish councils. We will still maintain the network. We will still proactively inspect your parishes, as we've always done. That is just an opportunity for you to see if anything localised that you want to highlight to us, that you want us to pay specific attention to. You don't have to take part in the Ranger process at all if you think that's causing you more work than you feel is necessary. But a lot of parish councils like it because it just gives them an opportunity to raise some local issues for us to get a gang there to sort out while they're in that vicinity. So it's supposed to be an extra over, a bit of extra TLC for the parish councils, just to get some local issues sorted out by just highlighting that through the Ranger service. And we do have a technician who manages that, and her aim is to follow all those defects through, ensure they're done, and then provide the clerks with an update before your parish council meetings to say highways have been out, they've had your defects, they've done this one, this one, this one, this one's still in to be done, and give you an update which hopefully is useful for you to send to take to the parish council meetings with a bit of an update. So it is that just to give you a bit of extra assistance from our highways team, really. But if you prefer not to be on that email list, because we do it in clusters of parishes, we can take your parish off that list, so you won't have any Ranger contact, if that's what you prefer.
Phil, do you want to come back on that quickly?
Yeah, no one's asking to be taken off the list. All we're saying is the list used to work perfectly well until you changed it and changed it and changed it. And no one in the parishes can understand some of the logic behind it. That's all we're saying. It's a system which worked and wasn't broken, and it's now a system which is fundamentally difficult for the parishes to manage. It's as simple as that. If all the information is there on the system, you don't need the parish to write to you again to tell you, this is all the stuff we've got. You've already got it. And just respond, say, we've dealt with all those items that were reported to us. It's very simple, and that's the point. It seems a clunky system which is not serving the parishes well. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure that point is noted. Move on to Robert, please, and then Fabian.
Thank you, Chairman. Yesterday you surface dressed Brettenham, or your contractors, Brettenham Road, Kilverston, and I was immediately asked, what is the purpose of surface dressing a pothole? So is there a process by which, prior to surface dressing, the potholes are dealt with?
Thank you. And Fabian?
Yeah, mine's actually just on what David already raised. Just to say my county council area is a significant size, and actually I will credit the contracts on grass cutting. They start on the area which is more of a heavier soil and grass grows first, and then move down to the areas nearer Thetford where it's slower grass cutting and work that area. My concern is if we're going to move the grass cutting earlier, all we're going to do is just kick this problem into the long grass and have this discussion in July, because the grass will grow more between, shall we say, the middle of April and now than it will afterwards. So that's one problem, and perhaps cost and defeat the point. The other thing is we're going to start losing biodiversity because those spring flowers have now become established in those points. And I'm just concerned that all of us, if we're not careful, we're all going to become grass-cutting NIMBYs, as long as everyone else has their long grass, but please cut it outside mine.
I've learned we've even got slow grass in Thetford. What's that all about? Didn't know that. Oh, have a word.
Put it that way.
Oh, David, do you want to respond to
Yeah,
those
okay,
points?
so with surface dressing, the idea of the surface dressing throughout the county is through the finer weather months, you're trying to seal up the roads ready for the winter. So any small cracks, minor defects within that surface is going to be sealed so the water doesn't get in and freeze over the winter and breaks out into potholes. With significant potholes within a surface dress site, we'll carry out preparation works prior to that. So we'll fill the potholes, get them ready, and then surface dress over the whole lot. Any minor defects, like I said, we'll just go over with the surface dressing. So that's the whole point of surface dressing. We do have a significant regime in Norfolk, we always have done for a long, long time, to get a lot of those roads sealed up, ready for the winter. The timing for grass, as I said earlier, it's very difficult. What happens is we'll sit down with Tarmac, a Tarmac governance meeting with our contractor. There'll be the area managers there, the contract manager, and the assistant director will be informed as well. And between us, we try and work out the best time to go. And that's quite difficult to do because we've got one less cut. So we're trying to spread the 4 over the season. So whether we're going to get that right, it remains to be seen. I think the consensus this season seems to be that we're a bit late with it. But if we go earlier, then the risk is at the other end, isn't it, of the season where you end up with long grass and possibly left for the winter. So not exactly an exact science there, but we just do our best to try and work out the best time to go, really. And that'll be the same for the next cut and the 2 after that.
Okay, happy? Alison, please.
Thank you. Okay, grass cutting is a really, it's a Marmite thing. Some people believe that the grass should stay long because of insects. Some people like to see it nice and tidy. It's a difficult one. I will give you an example. Last year, which I spoke to the gentleman about, I contact Norfolk County Council because I was getting a lot of complaints in that the grass hadn't been cut. And I got called an insect murderer. So I'm afraid this is a really difficult one. However, every year the weather is going to be different. We do have issues where, especially where there's junctions where people cannot see to pull out. We had one accident on Norwich Road and Marshall Road. We had a cat killed on there as well. Now, I know it's not important to some people, but actually cats are quite important to me. So, you know, at the end of the day, there must be some way of looking at what the weather is doing, looking at what the grass is doing in the different towns, villages, and trying to make this work a bit better, because this year it didn't. It was awful. I mean, the grass was nearly as tall as me, and I think we nearly lost one of the councillors in it. So that's the grass side, the grass cutting side. Grass going onto the road, I did want to talk to you about that because it was quite important that residents talk to the Tarmac organisation that were doing it. They were putting the grass, it was in Greenfields Road in Dereham, the grass was going all over the road. One of the residents said to them, it's going to go down the drains when it actually rains, and they said, not our problem, mate. Well, I rest my case. I mean, I did ring up, I did complain about it, didn't hear a thing back. I just think that there's a trend here where we're all seeing issues with the timing, issues with the grass going on the road, issues with potholes. There's a whole load of stuff which I do hope in my heart of hearts that Norfolk County Council listen to what's being said here. Thank you very much.
Okay. Do you want to respond to those ones quickly, David? And then I've got a couple for myself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. To say it's Marmite is correct. We do get many people like the aesthetics of it all being cut nicely and neat, and especially more recent years, there's certainly a lot of people that prefer it to be left. There's people that would like us to do no mow May. There's people that like it just left completely for the biodiversity, etc. So we cut it for safety reasons to try and reduce those growth around visibility splays. That's our main focus. It is difficult to get the timings right. We had 30 staff just in my area alone who are always out and about on the roads, looking at the growth, assessing it, reporting it back. People live obviously all different places at the county, and everyone's looking outside their window, and we'll get lots of feedback to try and work out when to go. But as I said earlier, it's not an easy thing to determine where it's time to go. What I was going to say on that, there is also the length of cut is a 4-week cycle. So if we instigate them on a certain date, the first couple of weeks might be okay, not too long, and then the week 3, week 4 could by then have seen significant growth, depending on what the weather's doing. And that certainly happened this time around. I know Deerham was, I think, week 3 this time, and we had some quite extensive growth from this point of instigating the cut to that period. So that is a problem, or can be a problem. And certainly the comments and everything that you've made us aware of today will be taken on board, and we'll take that back to the teams and make them aware of the comments you've made. So it's appreciated.
Lovely, thank you. Just a couple from myself then. Firstly, the report it system. I really like the system, the fact you can log in and you can see all of your reports, and then once it's actioned, you get told that it's been actioned. The bit that annoys me, and I think the bit that annoys the public, is when you report something and you get the dreaded email that says, this report does not meet our intervention criteria. Drives me nuts. I think you could probably expand on that and explain a bit more as to why it doesn't meet the intervention criteria, or I assume, I'm being optimistic here, I assume you continue to monitor that particular situation. So if a pothole at one point is not meeting the intervention criteria, presumably it will get worse before it's not going to automatically fill itself in. So you'll monitor that. And then linked to that, one of the good things about the system is when you report it and somebody else has already reported it, it tells you. Somebody else has already reported this. What it doesn't allow you to do, unless I'm missing something, is to report it again if the situation's got worse. So we had a case in Thetford where there was a pothole. It was reasonably bad, but it got worse over a period of weeks. It was down for a 28-day repair. In that time, it got significantly worse because it was cold weather, and a motorbike went over it, and the bloke came off his motorbike and ended up being a story in the press. So the system online didn't allow us to escalate that to say, and it's got worse, it needs to be an urgent repair. I was able to intervene as a county councillor and contact the office direct and do all of that. But members of the public should be able to not just be discouraged by, oh, somebody's already reported it, I'll go away again, but situation has changed. So is there a way of refining the reporting process to take that into consideration?
So just to be clear, you're saying that you'd like the opportunity, reporting online, to upgrade a defect to a more significant.
Yep.
That's something we can take back, Luke, isn't it? And we'll have a look into that and see if that's.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that being an issue, because I know that I've been a technician before. I know that we do get multiple reports. If a large pothole opens, we will get multiple reports for that same pothole.
Yeah.
Regarding the severity of it, I wasn't aware that was an issue. So that's obviously, certainly something that will feed back.
Okay, good. And budget-wise, obviously inflation's been bad enough recently, but I think it's the case that construction inflation is particularly an issue. How far ahead do you guys know what your funding is for maintenance and repairs? And is it keeping pace with inflation? Because presumably you've got significantly less money to undertake these repairs and maintenance.
I believe the last award was a 3-year deal without the allowance of inflation. Our industry, civil engineering, is running between 20-25% in some elements, especially materials. So that causes us obviously less of buying power, if you like. But however, this year we've had the 6.35 pothole money, additional money. So that has helped us considerably to carry out additional work to prevent potholes and fill potholes and those prevention measures as well. So that has helped offset some of the lack of inflation rise, if you like, on the budget side of things.
Okay, thank you. I'll pause my points there because I can email you separately, as I do. Roger, did you have a new point? I saw your hand go up midway through there.
Yeah, just quickly want to come back on the point that Fabian made. Biodiversity is really important. I think what my point of view is, and what residents are telling me is, yes, by all means, leave several of the verges. It's the junctions. We need to put more resources into making sure the junctions are cut more regularly from a safety aspect. It is a safety issue on the junction. So my plea would be, please go back to the County Council when you're talking about highways, see if you can address that issue. And I just want to say, on a wider point, I think Phil made some excellent points about how clunky the system is, and I think I alluded to that earlier on. I think the system has got worse since the new Norse contract come in, since this new regime come in. I found the whole thing terribly clunky and not at all efficient. What I'd like to see is I'd like to see some reorganisation, actually some serious reorganisation, so that people more at a local level can be the decision makers on what actually gets repaired in their area. For instance, I live in a service centre village at Swanton Morley. I'd love somebody to give me the budget for pothole repairs and a decent budget for all the grass cutting. I know we did get some money from the grass cutting and we've made alternative arrangements with parish, but I guarantee you give me the budget for pothole repairs. I'll get them done quicker if I'm holding the purse strings. They'd be done quicker and they'd be done to a far higher quality than some of the substandard repairs we get at the moment. And I think overall, my plea would be to politicians of county, district, parishes, across this county, we need to look to see how we can do this better at a more local level and get the decision making at a more local level. Give me the power to look after the purse strings as a parish. I'm talking as a parish council here. Give me that power on the purse strings, and I guarantee you get far better service for my residents than we currently get. The system is just too big and too clunky, and it's not working, in my opinion.
Thank you, Roger. And Fabian.
Just to come back to Roger, David will agree with me that in my division, speaking as a county councillor, the verges, the junctions are a priority and we take care of them away. We are a three-tier authority in Norfolk. You have your parish councillors, you have your local knowledge. If it's a Breckland issue, you go up to your Breckland district councillor. If it's a county council, you go to your county councillor and elude that. Now, some people don't like speaking to each other, and that's where the problem goes. Now, as far as I'm concerned, if it gets the job done, I'll speak to anyone, and it gets done. And that's how I see it done. I agree with you, but offline, I will say where I took some of your discussions about potholes and doing other things and where the complications, but I don't want to go on and take up all the meeting, but I'm happy to put some points across.
Lovely, thank you. Well, I think we've had a good debate there. It's lasted for an hour, so I'm going to close it there if we may. We're going to circulate the slides. In your presentation, David, you spoke about the Road Safety Community Fund, and I think that's quite timely because Breckland it's our year, isn't it, for that fund? Yes. Breckland and South Norfolk. Okay, and I believe a briefing went to county councillors about that recently, last Friday. So I wonder if we're circulating the slides, are we able to circulate that briefing to Breckland members as well? Because they'll be interested in road safety as well, I'm sure, and have some ideas of, local projects. I think that'd be really useful. But really appreciate David and Luke you coming along, and let you rush off. Thank you. Brilliant. We'll move on, please, to item 7, Finance and Performance Report. Very pleased to welcome Phil Cowan, Executive Member for Finance. Phil, do you want to introduce your report for us?
Thank you, Chairman. Now, with apologies to those who may have heard this before at Cabinet, I'll just do a brief run through on the quarter four. So this report reflects the position in which the council finds itself at the end of the year 22-23, and also this time we've embodied performance data for the same period, so that the overall report covers two topics. I'll reflect on the financial position, and Alison can report and discuss on the performance section. So the recommendation is that the capital budgets and associated funding are carried forward, and the details are in the papers. The revised capital budget and funding for 23-24 be approved at Appendix A, and similarly Appendix B. Now, when we look at the financial performance of the council, as we know, we look at it month by month on a quarterly basis. And at quarter three, we were looking at quite a different position than the one we ended up with at the end of the year at quarter four. And I think that's pretty impressive. So we can see at Appendix C, the budget deficit has fallen to just under £200,000, which is a reduction of £346,000 compared with where we were a quarter ago. And that's despite the health and housing costs having risen within the same period. And furthermore, the council has invested in its emergency housing provision in Thetford and Dereham, and this has resulted in stripping out up to £300,000 of cost as a result of that. And bear in mind that with some of those properties, it doesn't reflect the full year. So if we looked at pro rata for the full year, we'd be looking at somewhere between £350,000 and £375,000 a year saving that we made on the temporary accommodation cost, which I think is really good news. Our commitment to providing the best value for money services shows that the prudent fiscal policies that we employ do serve the residents of Breckland well. The detail behind the headline figures is in the report and identifies the significant variances, as ever. We've got Alison sitting alongside this, two Alisons, a brace of Alisons for us today. So we've got the other Alison Chubbuck, with us today, who can actually fill in some of the detail behind those finances, and we can both of us hopefully go to answer any questions on finances. And of course we've got Alison Webb here to talk about the performance. I think that's probably enough on the introduction, Chairman.
Lovely. Alison, do you want to do the performance bit now, and then we'll take questions on the whole report?
No, thank you, Chairman. Right, OK, I'm delighted to bring the quarter four performance report to overview and scrutiny today. I think this report highlights some of the great work that the council is currently doing, but also highlights some areas which we want to improve things in the next few months. Members will note that there's been a slight format change to the report, and some additional indicators for performance figures we just report on annually. You can find them in Appendix D of the report. As Phil has mentioned, demand on the council's housing team continues to be high. And as you can see, the number of disabled facility grants completed within 114 days was low. As we have previously discussed this at Cabinet, these numbers should improve in the new financial year when funding is made available to the team again. We also see some improvements around our freedom of information and complaint response times. And whilst these remain below where we want them to be, it's positive to see them moving in the right direction again. Importantly, on complaints, whilst we've had a few difficult months in terms of responses within timescale, our uphold rate, which is the number of complaints which we fully or partially at fault, has remained low throughout. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you very much for that, Alison. Questions, please. Roger?
I've got three. Do you want me just to get them out of the way?
Yeah, if you do them en bloc.
OK. So on Appendix A, I see that we overspent on the Queen Mother's Garden, £41,938. Could somebody explain why we're so far over the budget? Also on that Appendix A, looks to me like there's an underspend on disabled facilities grants of £770,875, which I was surprised by, considering we've discussed that at full council meetings a couple of times and we're told that there's no money. So I'd like to understand that better. And the last one's probably for Alison Chubbuck, is there's £8 million in non-UK banks. Can we have a bit more detail who these banks are, and is that money protected? I'm thinking going back years to the Icelandic banks, and I'd like some surety on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Which Alison wants to go first? Phil wants to go first.
We'll start with the last one first,
Yes.
Alison Chubbuck.
All of our investments meet our counterparty criteria set by our Treasury Management advisors, and often some of the foreign banks have a stronger rating than some of the UK banks, for example. So I don't know exactly which ones they were at the end of the year. I'll have to go back and let you know if that's okay, which banks. There's never a 100% guarantee, but the only investments that we make are ones where they meet the strict criteria from our Treasury Management advisors, that they meet the higher criteria, which is as much protection as we can get ourselves.
Okay, thank you.
The DFGs, which is always a topic which is appealing to many people for various reasons. So the figure that we've got actually is an underspend, although it's all committed. It is all committed to be spent. All the projects have been allocated. I think this is a problem which we're all aware of, and I think Alison can fill in some detail on the team and what they've been doing. But we have increased the number of contractors who will undertake work in order to pull back those that technical underspend, because it's all committed. I picked it up as well when I looked at the figures and had a conversation with my colleague on my right over here and said, what on earth's going on? The two of us had a conversation about that and identified that whilst we haven't not technically spent the money, we've actually allocated all the funds to every single project that can be carried out. The problem has been that there haven't been sufficient tradesmen out there, workforce, of the right calibre and the right quality throughout the year. And we're currently upgrading effectively our workforce. But Alison, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I just want to add on to that when I had the housing portfolio, I hadn't realised how different some of the different applications for DFGs were. Some of them are a complete extension with a wet room and everything, and that's not something you can do in 3 days. It's something that's going to take a little while to do. I know the money has been allocated. I know that the team has been increased from 2, I think it was 2 when I first started, to 7, and I think, as I said, we're still looking at whether it needs to go further. But at the end of the day, as I said, because of the backlog that we did have, getting through the work that can take up to 2 or 3 months to do, this is where we are on it, and this is being honest. And I know how important it is to get DFGs through the door and finished for the residents as soon as possible. I mean, we all know how important it is, so we're putting as much pressure on it as possible to get it. However, not at any cost as far as contractors are concerned, because it's really important that the contractors we use are good contractors, not just cowboys.
Okay.
Sorry.
That's all right. And if I, just before you come back on any of those, Queen Mother's Garden, I can't give you an answer. I can't give you an answer on why there's an overspend. I don't know if you can, Alison.
Well, there was... Right, OK. I'm going to say no at this point, and I'm going to find out and get back to you. That's the best way.
And unfortunately, Paul Hewitt was here earlier, but he's had to leave to go to another meeting. He was going to be picking up some of these capital project questions. I don't know if we have an officer in the room, Chairman, who can answer that question.
I guess.
If there is, please wave. Oh. Do you have all the answers, Fabian? No. Oh, OK. OK. Roger, do you want to come back on those?
So thank you for that, and I look forward to hearing about the Queen Mother's Garden. On the DFGs, I think what I'd like to understand is, obviously I don't want to know the specifics of detailed of each project and names and addresses and all that, but I think it would be quite interesting for me to understand there must be a list somewhere of the number of projects and the value against each of those projects. Is that something that you could make available to me, please? Because I'd be quite keen to see the sort of the monetary value of the projects and see if they're, what the typical values are. would be interesting.
It's an interesting question because I asked the same thing at
Yeah.
our last informal meeting upstairs. And Claire sitting alongside me, who's now responsible with the portfolio for that, and we have agreed that we will get some more detail. We don't want to get down into the detail weeds, but we want a little bit of a higher level understanding of the range of projects. Are they all things like fixing a handrail, or are they wet rooms, or where do they fit? So we can understand a little bit more than just a blanket, here's £1 million and it's going to be spent on DFGs.
I think 770 odd thousand here, you can do an awful lot of work with that. So I'd like to understand, is that just half a dozen projects, building extensions, or is it 100 projects? That's what I'd really like to understand.
Later on the agenda, Roger, I'm sure you would have noticed the work programme, and DFGs is something that's been spoken about at Scrutiny and at full council, and I think there's a need to add DFGs to the work programme and look at it a bit more thoroughly. So I'm pleased there's a sort of acceptance with that. I'm conscious we've got Jill and Sarah at the back there. Is there anything you want to add at this point to that conversation about DFGs, or wait until a future date? Put you on the spot there, but...
Oh, sorry.
Hiya. Yeah, if I can go back to the reason why there was so much carryover at the end of the year. It's not underspend, it is carryover. And it's not because we didn't have enough contractors. It's because two reasons. Firstly, we, halfway through the year, knew that we were running out of money, and we decided to hold back a certain amount of money for what's called Priority 1+ cases. So the recommendations come from the occupational therapists at the county of what are the most urgent ones that are needed, and they're the ones that are where there's a risk of life or a serious risk of going into hospital. So we held back a certain amount of money for those, and then when those come in, then we actioned each of those as they came in immediately. So when we'd said we'd run out of money, we'd run out of the money for the normal cases, but we kept the money for the Priority 1 cases. As is normal throughout the financial year when you're dealing with DFGs, there are some cases that never actually need doing in the end. Sometimes people have gone into care, and sometimes, unfortunately, they've died. So more money comes back that had been committed earlier, then gets committed or comes back into the budget later in the year. So that accounts for some of the money that came back later on. When we got to Q4, we knew at that point how much money we had left to spend. So as well as all the Priority 1+ cases, we then actioned all the ones lower down. So the Priority 2s, Priority 3s and some Priority 4s. So we then committed all of that budget in Q4. All of the work was started, and some of it will have been completed at the end of the quarter but not invoiced for, and some of it will have gone over into the next quarter. So we didn't have a problem with contractors. We had a problem with working out how to spread the budget out to meet the highest needs, and then we agreed that with the County Council. So all of it is spent, all of it is committed.
Yes, quickly, Roger.
Just want to say, at the last full council meeting, David Wickerson, who's not here today, he asked specifically a question of Claire in her capacity as the new housing portfolio to give us an update on the government funding, because I know the council were asking government for additional funding on DFGs. I don't think he's received that answer yet, and I'd be grateful if we could have that and probably send that to all members so we can see what the current situation is. Thank you.
Okay, noted. Move on to the next question. Harry, please.
Just a very brief question before I sort of kick off. I can report a positive outcome on DFGs for a resident in my ward who actually has been told that I think it's a year early after an intervention. They've actually got this about a year early happening. That's not the whole picture. My question is possibly to Councillor Cowan or possibly Councillor Alison W. It might be my reading of it. under 1.2 in the introduction of the background to the report, it refers to the performance board and talks about how it feeds into overview and scrutiny. Just so I'm not mixing anything up, is there a separate performance board report we're getting separately in from Councillor Cowan's overall headline report, and that sits within it? I'll just making clear we wouldn't be getting a separate report. It's all be contained within that, still obviously within that portfolio, but there wouldn't be a separate report presented by our finance colleagues. Thank you.
Chairman, I think Ryan Pack can probably be best placed to answer that particular question.
Yes, please. Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks. Thanks for your question, Councillor. So the performance board is an internal board we have for monitoring performance, and then that report forms this report, which we're going to get. So it's not a separate report. It's just this one's a slightly more filtered down one around sort of specific issues.
Okay. Any other finance and performance related questions? Fabian.
Yeah, thank you. Just regarding car parks resurfacing, we had an underspend there. We only spent 4,000. I always thought car park resurfacing was a major problem and expense. So if we've got away with 4,000, it's quite good. Just wondered why. And just to come back, really, Phil, question to yourself. I'm going to ask you the question you've just asked County Council. We've got all these underspends and everything else gone. What have you done to factor in the inflationary rises and costs and all these things, such as the DFGs and everything else, and resurfacing if we're not underspend and carrying items forward? Oh, sorry.
I'm going to slide that one to my right, if you don't mind, both of those, because the detail on the car park resurfacing, as I suspect, is a rescheduling of works, which is why it's happened. And as to the inflation, Alison will be able to give you a very detailed analysis.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. We wouldn't be able to resurface a car park for 4,000, sadly. So that'll be a project in progress, but reschedule the timing into future years. In terms of inflation, we reset the budget back in February, so that would have been with our best estimates at the time of inflation. But until we actually go out for quotes for the work, we may have got it wrong. So we've done our best estimates as we can, and we reset them every year as part of the budget.
Yeah, I understand that if we're doing a current project, but if we've carried some money forward because something hasn't been completed or we've done it, then obviously we have got to factor in allowance, because obviously X will not cover the amount moving forward into the year. That was my question, and asking what we've dealt with to do with that, please.
If I can just refer you to Appendix C in the papers, which is the variances on the capital projects. You'll see there that the car park item is listed, and it says the contractor has been procured, and the works will be carried out during 23-24. The costs are expected to be higher than budgeted, but we're waiting to see what those costs may well be. So the Appendix A document is the overarching one, but then you look at the detail behind it in Appendix C, and you'll also see, as a matter of interest, the disabled facility grant figure that's carried forward in Appendix C is lower than this, and that's probably because some of the works have already been completed and invoiced, because it's now standing at 658,000, not 770. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, just a couple for myself before we move on. Thank you, Phil. You've given me the pro rata in relation to housing, which is the point I made at Cabinet, so I noted that. Thank you. The report mentions housing a lot, and it talks about unprecedented demand, high demand. I just think it'd be really useful to know to what extent that demand has increased. I don't think we should be shy about the figures. So if we've got numbers for new people registering for housing support, housing homelessness figures, that sort of thing, I just think we should be really clear about the scale of the challenge in the report. And unprecedented, well, how much unprecedented compared to previous years? I just think we should add a bit of human element to it, and how many are we talking about here? So I certainly appreciate that. And just a really pedantic point on the performance report, the disabled facilities grants talks about applications completed. That monitors not necessarily the number of applications that we have or the completion of the application for the grant. It monitors the implementation of the work that's needed, as I understand it. So when a wet room, for example, has been put in. And I just think that wording could be a bit clearer on what we're monitoring. We're monitoring the work being done, not necessarily the application process as such. So I think that could do with being tidied up. But other than that, I'm happy. OK, members happy to note the report? Yeah, thank you very much. Phil and Alison for presenting both of those. We'll move on to item 8, infrastructure levy consultation, to receive an update on the infrastructure levy consultation from Simon Wood. Thank you very much for waiting patiently there, Simon, and I believe you've got a presentation for us.
Yes, I have, which Ruth will drive for me. So if we can kick this off, that would be great. So next slide, please, Ruth. Oh, hopefully it works. So the principle of the infrastructure levy is set out in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. The bill's currently working its way through Parliament, and when I last checked earlier on, it's currently at the report stage in the House of Lords, and its assent is expected in September, October this year. It replaces the current system of developers' contributions, and as members will know, the main source of developer contributions within Breckland is the Section 106 obligation. The Community Infrastructure Levy is also available, but Breckland is not a SIL charging authority. The latest figures are that about 50% of authorities are SIL charging authorities. The rest rely almost entirely on Section 106 obligations. The infrastructure levy will be mandatory and non-negotiable, so every local planning authority will be required to use the infrastructure levy, and it won't be an obligation or a levy where developers can come in and argue around viability, because in theory that work will have been done. It will be locally determined, and what the bill is doing is establishing the principle of the levy. The detailed design will be through the regulations. So it will be charged on the value of the property at completion. So effectively it will be a roof tax, for want of a better phrase. It will be charged per square metre and applied above a minimum threshold. There is the ability to set different rates within a local authority area. You can currently do that within SIL as well. It isn't getting rid of Section 106 obligations entirely, and there can continue to be limited use of Section 106 obligations, particularly where you need to enter into agreements with developers for the management and maintenance of areas such as open space, etc. Internal infrastructure is expected to be provided by developers as part of the development, and that's things such as estate roads, internal open space, those sorts of facilities. And it sets out that the system is expected to deliver as much, if not more, affordable housing under the right to require principle as at present. Thank you. So in terms of getting set up for the infrastructure levy, each council will need to prepare an infrastructure delivery strategy, which effectively will set out the types of infrastructure that is required within a district. It will support the local plan, essentially, and also how that infrastructure will be delivered. And one of the things that the consultation is looking at is trying to understand what needs to be included in those strategies. So it could apply to all types of developments, including development permitted through permitted development rights, but that has to ensure that such development remains viable. So you're looking at sort of prior notification or permitted development for agricultural buildings to dwellings, office buildings to dwellings, etc. Some of those are currently exempt from CIL charges. The infrastructure delivery strategy and the rates that you are setting will be subject to examination once they're drafted. So the local authority can't unilaterally fix those rates. They have to go through that examination process. And you may well be aware that the community infrastructure levy also goes through an examination process as well. So it's proposed that local authorities could borrow against future infrastructure levy proceeds to front fund infrastructure. That, of course, comes with its own risks, and we'll elaborate on that a little bit further down the line. There will be the ability to retain a neighbourhood share. Within CIL at present, there is the ability to top slice an element to go down to parish or town councils, and also an administrative share, which within CIL is around about 5%. It's going to be introduced through what they call a test and learn process over several years. The date that's identified in terms of all authorities having to utilise this is towards the end of this decade, 2029, 2030, but they are looking for authorities to volunteer to pilot this effectively. Also, sites permitted before the introduction of the levy will continue to be subject to their CIL and Section 106 requirements. So it's not backdated, it will come into force, and anything determined after that date will be subject to the levy. Thank you. So we presented a report to Cabinet on the 30th of May, setting out the main issues in relation to the levy, and a copy of the document and the questions were circulated to all members with the ability to provide a response to myself for consideration within those responses. I have to say I haven't received anything yet. We are finalising the responses in agreement with the portfolio holder for planning and the Deputy Chief Executive, and we need to submit those by tomorrow, basically. So we're now on quite a tight timescale, and those responses are in a very advanced draft position. So the consultation document itself has a number of headings which are set out there. Sorry, Ruth, next slide. So it's design choices, the rates that can be charged and the thresholds, how the levy is charged and the process for paying it, how infrastructure is delivered, a specific topic around affordable housing, then a general area, and how the levy will be introduced. Thank you, Ruth. So in terms of our responses, just sort of going through the main points really, because there are 49 questions, so I don't propose to go through all of them. The view we're taking is that developers should continue to provide some infrastructure directly as part of any approved scheme that is required to directly mitigate its own impact. So internal infrastructure needs to be quite clearly defined. Just as an example, the Attleborough Urban Extension has a relief road going through, a link road. Is that something that would be picked up as part of the development, or is that something that would be picked up through the infrastructure levy? There needs to be clear guidance as to what that would be. There also needs to be the ability for local councils to identify what infrastructure is provided by developers and what through the levy, and that has to reflect the needs of development and local communities. Many district councils, and I quote the future Breckland work, many district councils have a very good handle on what is required, not only in terms of infrastructure, but also community needs as well. And the infrastructure levy does talk about looking at other service areas outside of infrastructure as well, which comes on to the next point. So I think the view is being taken that the levy should, where appropriate, be available for other service provisions, such as homelessness, such as environmental protection, that there are lots of services that are impacted by growth in population, and currently it is difficult, other than through council tax, to get funding for those. However, there will always need to be arguments around prioritisation and spending what will be inevitably a finite budget. We would agree that the infrastructure levy should apply to dwellings created using permitted development rights, and we also think that any variations to those rates, i.e. to bring about viability in some areas of a district or to allow marginal development, should be determined locally, but the guidelines should be clear and nationally set to avoid districts being in competition with each other. So the community infrastructure levy does allow you to apply different rates in different locations where values are lower, or where there is difficulty in bringing forward housing development and there's a desire to actually encourage that. Thank you, Ruth. I think one of the main points is that members who have looked at the consultation document will be aware that it looks a very complex process. It's going to require expertise. It's going to require additional capacity that most authorities will need to buy in. There will be exceptions, but I would, in my experience, looking at viability, identifying infrastructure, costing up infrastructure are quite specialist areas of work. In terms of collecting and paying the levy, payment is proposed prior to first occupation of a property. So effectively, a development will be relatively well advanced before payments start to come in, and this could potentially delay important schemes coming forward. And whilst it's proposed that councils can borrow against the levy, this of course has inherent risks. Some of those risks around if you borrow on the basis that a certain number of properties will be developed over a period of time, and either not all of those come forward or the time period is slower, then that's quite a risk to the council in terms of that borrowing provision. Local authorities should, in our view, be able to require payments up front to front-load infrastructure provision where required. Again, a local decision. Infrastructure levy will be a charge against the land, and what the levy paper is proposing is that once the first property becomes occupied, that charge should be removed. I think it's our view that actually the charge should remain until the full payment is made. That acts as an incentive to developers to bring payments forward and to make sure that payments are made. There also needs to be safeguards against companies going out of business further down the line when developments are largely complete, and trying to avoid paying infrastructure levy as well. Thank you, Ruth. So just in terms of borrowing, it's not going to be a solution for many authorities. Some authorities don't have the ability or the know-how in terms of being able to borrow. The proceeds should cover both interest and principal repayments, and that was something that was brought up at Cabinet, but the paper is very light on. There is a view that the government should underwrite borrowing against infrastructure levy receipts in case schemes aren't delivered in the numbers required to offset the borrowing that is made by a council. That comes back to the point that if you're borrowing against a certain value and a certain number of dwellings coming forward within a certain time frame, and that is critical, then you need to be able to have some safeguards to enable you to have confidence in borrowing. There needs to be flexibility to allow councils to adapt to local need and changing circumstances, such as where development is being provided and the numbers being delivered, but also in terms of the infrastructure that is required, having regard to the changing needs of population, both existing and coming into new development. Communities need to be part of the process in identifying infrastructure need alongside the local plan, alongside the normal evidence bases that we would bring forward. Thank you, Ruth. Affordable housing is always a key part of infrastructure, and as members will know, our policy at present is to look at 25% of dwellings to be affordable above a certain threshold, i.e. 11 dwellings or more on a development, and local authorities are challenged on viability and very often are unable to deliver that policy requirement. So affordable housing generally runs at a rate that is below what is demonstrably needed within a district. What the infrastructure levy is indicating is that the right to require, i.e. the ability to top slice the levy to provide affordable housing, should be based on your delivery rates, not what is required. And I think that's a point we need to make quite strongly, that it needs to be based on need, not on delivery, particularly if the levy is supposed to enhance affordable housing. It's supposed to remove challenges around viability and create more certainty around the delivery of affordable housing. There is a view that the neighbourhood share element should be retained and made wider to enable councils to make an allowance within infrastructure levy receipts for wider groups to benefit. We do that to a degree at the moment with leisure and open space provision. However, again, it's all about prioritising and making those decisions locally. Thank you, Ruth. There is a proposal within the consultation that there be an exemption for self and custom built houses and residential annexes that are occupied separately. That they create similar infrastructure requirements as open market housing, and that there's no clear argument as to why there should be an exemption for those. Again, the infrastructure levy poses the question, should there be a reduced levy rate where there are significant climate change benefits in terms of how buildings are constructed? There needs to be clear guidance on that, but if that can be demonstrated and can be retained over the lifetime of a dwelling, then there could be potential for that to be an incentive to go down that route. There's also a question posed in relation to small and medium-sized builders, and is it appropriate to have reduced rates for such companies? I think support for SME builders is extremely important and extremely necessary. The issue in a district such as Breckland is that a significant proportion of our housing is provided by small and medium-sized builders. And we need to be very conscious that if you apply a reduced rate to those companies, then potentially that will have an impact on the amount of monies that you would receive. So I think, again, possibly at a local level. We've also indicated that we're prepared to be a test and learn authority, and we're yet to hear back as to whether that's something that we will be doing. So thank you, Ruth. So that was a sort of an overview of the approach that we're taking. Comments, questions, more than welcome. Thank you, Chairman.
Lovely, thank you for that, Simon, and thank you for sharing the document in good time. I can't confess I read every single page, but it was very interesting. I actually felt I learned quite a bit, so I do appreciate that. Robert, you indicated during that presentation, so question?
Thank you, Chairman. I think there's a big intellectual fault with this in that all developers are deemed to be equal, and I think the reality is the big national house builders probably have a 20% cost advantage over the SME builders locally, and therefore this is likely to put a lot of small builders out of business. In terms of rates set locally, would that be in the form of having small site exemptions or reductions in levy for small sites? And ultimately, extra costs make houses less affordable and you get less delivery. So it goes completely against what the government says it's trying to do.
Okay, Simon.
Yeah, I think the point around not all developers being equal is totally valid. I think that the risk that you have within some districts is that, as we made in the point we made in the presentation, is that we have a high proportion of our dwellings provided by small and medium-sized builders. So we need to be very conscious of that and make central government conscious that is a challenge. It may well be that there may be a small site exemption. A lot of sites below 10 or fewer dwellings is exempt from a lot of the Section 106 obligations and affordable housing, and it may well be that is taken forward again. In terms of affordability, what the levy is seeking to do is to try and provide a cost base that is based on viability. I do think there is an argument that if costs increase, those will inevitably be passed on to people buying houses. It's the same in terms of biodiversity net gain credits. It's going to be the same almost certainly in terms of nutrient neutrality credits. But what this is seeking to do is to make sure that development remains viable, and that where there is a uplift in value as a result of planning permission being granted, that uplift is utilised in part to provide necessary infrastructure. So hopefully, I say hopefully, that will have a minimal impact on house prices.
Okay, thank you. Harry, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did attend the Cabinet presentation, and a couple of things that occurred to me seeing the presentation again. Thank you, Simon. One is you referred to, excuse me, the possibility or the likelihood of planning authorities having to buy in extra expertise to help capacity on CIL, which is uncharted territory for us, and presumably there's going to be revenue consequences for that, for in-house costs. And also related to that,
Simon, is your microphone off? Sorry, I can't hear. There we go.
Breckland, you alluded to being a test and learn authority. Will there be any?
Sorry, will there be any pump priming funds allocated for that, or will that have to cost to be absorbed if we were successful? Thank you.
Apologies, I'll remember to switch it off next time. In terms of the need to buy in expertise and provide capacity to do the work to set up the infrastructure levy, the consultation document does indicate that there would be an ability to use revenue from the infrastructure levy to fund that, and a couple of the questions are directly related to that. In terms of test and learn, the broad understanding from the little information we have at the moment is that would be something that you would do alongside DLUC, and it is hoped that there would be funding available to enable you to do that. Otherwise, they may well not get as much learning as they hope.
Thank you. Roger.
Yeah, I'm glad you put in the responses about district councils being expected to borrow money to pay for this stuff up front, because I think that's a non-starter, to be honest. I think developers will find a way of working around that. I suppose my question is, what capacity have we got right at this moment in terms of our local plan review? Seems to me that we should be doing a body of work in tandem with that local plan review right now to identify the infrastructure requirements for the district, and they also need to be costed because we need to have an understanding of what infrastructure we need. Now, I presume that there was some work, or should have been some work done around the existing local plan to say what the infrastructure requirements are for the existing plan and costings for that. So as a district, if government come calling and say, well, how much money do you need to sort out your infrastructure requirements in the district? You've got projects there ready to go with an idea of the cost. What are we doing right now to address the need to be working on this right now? Because it seems to me this important work needs to go hand in glove with the local plan review. That's going to require resources. That's going to need professionals to identify those infrastructure requirements in consultation with members and probably the wider communities to ensure we get the infrastructure that we need. It's all very well saying we're going to raise a levy, but what's it actually going to be spent on? You know, what is the requirements in the district? So perhaps Simon, and that might be a question for Sarah actually. Yeah, are we looking to do that? Are we putting some funds and resources into that? What's the plan, please?
Thank you, Councillor. As part of the local plan review and part of the requirement to make sure that allocations and the local plan itself is deliverable and viable, we do have to do work around what infrastructure is required to support that in terms of providing an infrastructure plan and an infrastructure delivery plan. There's also work elsewhere through county, etc., to identify strategic infrastructure that is required to bring development forward as well. How we cost that is going to be variable depending on the infrastructure that's required and the information we have available at that time. But that is a normal piece of work that we will do through the local plan review. The timings for the infrastructure levy, if you set aside the sort of the test and learn element, the local plan is we're aiming to get that adopted around about 2025. And the infrastructure levy won't come in until the end of the decade. So we would probably be going through another process around that time in terms of a 5-year review of the local plan. So to a degree, it's a little bit premature to be committing heavily to the more detailed work that may or may not be involved in the infrastructure levy. We have to provide some details as part of the local plan. At the moment, I don't think we need to go into the detail that's required in terms of the infrastructure levy. Do you want to pick up?
Sorry. Yeah, and I think it's like we've said before when all these consultations were alluded to in previous meetings when we spoke about this white paper. We knew that they would be coming. We didn't know when, the timings of them, which ones would come about first. We've got some certainty around this one that it's going to happen and we know when it's going to happen. And I think the team have done a really good job at the response on the council's behalf at foreseeing what some of these problems are going to be. But then there is that piece of work, you know, we've been talking this morning about housing requirements, DFGs. That's something which we all need to be feeding into the local plans. So I think there's a degree of stuff, like Simon has said, that we need to be working to in tandem and alongside each other with regards to the local plan. We've committed to make sure we're not going to delay at getting that local plan review put forward and submitted. But we just do need to make sure that we pick up as much of this stuff to make it all as efficient and effective as possible along the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Roger, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah. If we're doing a local plan review, so we've done a call for sites. We're assessing those individual sites to ascertain whether they're developable and deliverable, and you go through that criteria. And while you're doing that, the infrastructure is key. There's no point building 100 houses in the middle of nowhere and you've got to build brand new roads, etc. to it. So the infrastructure part of it surely must go, that work must go hand in glove with the work that you're doing on the site specifics. So when you're identifying and you're evaluating each of those sites that have been put forward, as part of that, you'll be evaluating what infrastructure improvements would be required to make that site deliverable. So I don't see it as a piece of work that happens after the local plan review. I see it as a piece of work that needs to be done in tandem with the local plan review, because the infrastructure is absolutely key. It's no good saying, well, yes, we could build 100 houses on that field, but to go with that, you know, that might need a road widening scheme, that might need a new piece of road, pavements, I don't know, anything. So I don't see that work coming. There needs to be that much that's done after 2025. That work needs to be done now, because you need to identify the infrastructure in tandem with the sites. If not, the whole thing's out of kilter, isn't it? Because you'll be doing the local plan, and I think what you're saying is we're then going to look at the infrastructure after 2025 before the SIL comes in. We need to be doing that now. The infrastructure is absolutely key to the growth of the district and making sure we get the housing and business growth where we need it, and what do we need to enable that, and that needs to be costed. My other question was, on the future Breckland initiative, there's a number of projects that are identified in those market towns. Has all that work been costed? Do we know the actual costs for for that work? So say Dereham Marketplace, I think I'll take Dereham as an example. You know, there's a project identified in there to pedestrianise the marketplace, and I've seen some lovely artist impressions, but has that been costed? Could we go to somebody and say, we know what that's going to cost to do? I appreciate inflation's a problem, but do we know? Have we had that costed as a ready-to-go project? So that would be a second, but perhaps you can answer the first bit about the in-tandem work on the infrastructure, please.
Yeah, apologies if I didn't make myself clear, but I think I'm probably agreeing with a lot of what you've said in terms of infrastructure. Always a good answer. Yeah, we will have to work with developers and promoters bringing land forward to identify the infrastructure required in discussion with other stakeholders such as Highways Authority, education providers, etc., and be sure that in delivering that infrastructure and that identified infrastructure, that site is viable. The difference in terms of the infrastructure levy is how that is funded. In terms of, do you take a top slice and you give it to a delivery authority to bring that forward, or do you say to a developer, well, actually, you need a school there, or this school needs enhancing, you're going to have to pay and provide that funding directly to the education authority. It is the mechanism, I think, that is changing. Go on.
I think I'm talking about planning resources, and I think what you're talking about is accountants, because that'll be accountancy function to determine the financial elements. That's probably a bit beyond me, but I'm talking about the resources now in terms of planning. Do you have the resources to do all that work on the infrastructure requirements needed for the local plan review? Because that's quite a detailed piece of work. And if we get that right now, that would make it much easier to do the money side of it post the local plan being adopted and then the implementation of the infrastructure levy. So I think it's the resource thing now. I think the key is identifying those projects and doing the technical aspect now. The money side of it and how it's funded can be post 2025.
We're constantly reviewing the resources and the capacity we have to deliver the local plan. That's an ongoing piece of work. What we're doing is what is required at the moment to bring the local plan through to adoption, and that will include identifying infrastructure, and it will include having to do costings on that to ensure that delivery that those developments are viable and can be brought forward. Otherwise, we can't allocate, and that will be challenged by the inspector at examination. But in terms of resources at this moment in time, we have a resource plan based on what we need to deliver. We're reviewing that all the time. I'm in discussions with the portfolio holder all the time as well, in order to make sure that we could meet the timetable, which is challenging, that we've set ourselves. In terms of future Breckland, I'm probably not the person to answer in relation to that.
Yeah, do you want to respond to that particular point? Have you switched yours off, Simon?
Yes.
There we go. For the future Breckland work, there's high level of costs associated with all the projects that are identified in the programme. Are they sufficient to go out and contract to works? No, further detail would need to be done, but there's certainly high level indicative prices attached to the marketplace and to all of the projects that are put forward as part of future Breckland. So we have a list, an indicative high level price for each of those. You'd then need to go into more detail and do a proper costed scheme for each of them.
I'm going to take Peter, Roger, and then because he's been waiting patiently, and then I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, our councillor colleague here has covered the whole base where we need to be, obviously with the local plan and this new levy. The point I was just going to ask Simon was the bill's now in the House of Lords, you mentioned, and you also mentioned we need to get legislation in there where we can have affordable housing on the need numbers rather than what the builder thinks we can build, is it, or what you're saying? So I think that's very important, that that's legislation that we are able to demand the affordable housing by our need in Breckland.
Do you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, what the levy paper is suggesting is that your affordable housing right to require slice is based on delivery and not on need, and we need to be basing it on need. Yeah.
Okay.
When and at what point do we make sure that's legislation in the bill, rather than trying to do something after the bill's gone through and signed off?
This consultation paper is looking at those details and seeking views from stakeholders, including local authorities, local housing authorities, local planning authorities, in relation to the specific questions. So the regulations that come out of the bill, once that's got royal assent, will be informed by the outcomes of this consultation. So at some stage in the next few months, a document will be produced that will set out all the consultation responses and the government's response to those responses, and then we will see where that goes.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anyone else indicating. I will come back to you, Roger. Just a couple from myself. Firstly, just a pedantic point. Question 4 talks about Breckland Council funding homelessness. I'm hoping we're funding homelessness prevention services rather than funding homelessness. So you might want to, I know what you meant, but you might want to amend that. It's probably because I'm not as familiar with this subject than some, but it talks about, refers to on-site infrastructure needed to make a site livable. And I wondered if there's a definition of what's livable. And it talks about integral infrastructure. There was a bit more of a definition of what integral there, but it's really about definitions. Does that come after the consultation? Something that's livable, something that's integral might mean different things to different people.
I don't recall there being questions around definition of livable, but certainly there are questions as to who should be defining what integral infrastructure is. And I think my view is that that's something that should be, that there should be national guidance on what the broad principles of integral infrastructure are, but there probably needs to be able to be a local decision as well. I mean, something like the Attleborough Relief Road is a clear example to me of where there could be a little bit of a grey point.
Yep. And Rob's picked up the point about future Breckland costs. That's fine for the market towns where we've got those sort of high-level indicative costs. What about the rest of the district where we don't have those reports? Does that put us at a slight disadvantage potentially with infrastructure?
I think the only point I make in relation to future Breckland is that local authorities are often in a good place to understand what their communities need, and you would we would be hoping that through additional work, potentially around the infrastructure levy, that again rural areas would be accommodated, would be able to have a voice. One of the important things in the local plan review is to make sure that we get out to those rural parishes and are able to engage them through the local plan process and hopefully understand what those needs are, as well as talking to other stakeholders.
Okay, good, because I saw reference in the document to future Breckland, but there is an obvious gap. The towns are ahead of everywhere else. And then lastly, one of the main stated aims is to make the process more transparent. I did wonder what it's like currently, if this is more transparent. But it seems to be, as a resident or as a developer, if the general thrust is we want infrastructure levy and ultimately it's the council that decides how that is spent, unless there's a very clear list of the infrastructure needs, it's not going to be more transparent, is it? It's going to be incredibly flexible. At what point do you know what if I was a developer, do you know what infrastructure you would be funding?
I think if we take our guide from what's currently required for the community infrastructure levy, then councils that are still charging councils have to publish what's called a 1, 2, 3 list. That has to be put on the website, and that sets out the areas in which they will spend their SIL receipts and what they're collecting SIL monies for. Any variation to that has to be put on there and be agreed by the authority. That 1, 2, 3 list forms part of the examination, but there is the flexibility to vary it once that examination has determined that the infrastructure on there, it can be justified and has been evidenced. I would suspect that it will be a similar process.
Okay, that's reassuring. Roger, did you have a point that's not been made?
I just following up what Rob said about the future Breckland. You've got these high-level indicative costs, which is okay. I'd like to know how you arrived at that figure, who gave us the advice that is a reasonable figure for that work, because that did form part of a levelling up bid to government, unfortunately unsuccessful with regard to Dereham. So if we had been successful and got that funding from government, we couldn't be certain the funding was sufficient to do the job. So I'm just wondering whether more work needs to be done on that, so we're match ready. If funding does come available, we can get the shovels out and get on with the work.
It's going to go out the window soon, isn't it? Just to provide a bit of increased clarity for you, Councillor as well. In terms of the future Breckland work, the high-level costings were provided by the consultants who are experienced in the field and did that work on our behalf. I should have pointed out those of the projects chosen from future Breckland to be put forward for levelling up, a significant amount of additional work was done on those projects. Combination of it.
Who's the next one?
I'm not sure it's worth it. Anyway, in terms of the levelling up bids, where there were a small number of specific projects pulled out of future Breckland and put forward from government funding, there was a significant amount of additional work done both by an in-house team as part of Andrew Holdsworth's team in economy and growth, plus also using the external partners that we'd use on the future Breckland work. So when we put in the levelling up bids, a significant amount of additional detail was done for those specific projects. That level of detail doesn't apply, is not available for all future Breckland projects, just for those specific ones. So what future Breckland meant we could do is we had the projects ready to go and ready and primed to do that additional work so we could move at pace. Additional work was still clearly needed, and the same would apply at the current point for any of the other projects.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to draw it to a close there. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Simon, for bringing that along, and we'll get that sent off tomorrow and see what happens next. But thank you very much. Going to pause there. Would members appreciate a comfort break, or do you want us to push through and finish off the agenda? Push through? Yeah, we've got 2 or 3 items, so No pressure, whoever's coming next. What we've got? Task and finish groups. I'm going to invite Linda to introduce this one because you chaired the Serco Task and Finish group, Linda. So do you want to introduce that one?
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just by way of background, especially for new members, in December 2021, it was proposed a task and finish group be set up to examine the new Serco contract. And this proposal followed concerns raised by members about the quality of the services being delivered and the service impacts experienced during the mobilisation of the contract. So a task and finish group was set up consisting of 7 members, chaired by myself, with 3 terms of reference: to examine the governance arrangements in place to manage and monitor the contract, to examine the impact of COVID and the national supply chain issues on the mobilisation of the contract, and to scrutinise the current performance of the Serco contract. So all the full details of all those meetings are in previous minutes, etc. But now I'm going to hand over to Rihanna and Sarah, and they will take through the recommendations and where we are with them at the moment.
Lovely. Thank you, Rihanna.
Thank you. So there were 5 actions from the outcome of the Task and Finish Group report. So I'll just go through each of those and give you an update on those. The first one was to note the contents of the report, which you did. So move into the second action. That was that members request that relevant officers raise concerns relating to morale in frontline staff to seek assurance from Serco that processes and procedures were in place to ensure staff morale remains a priority. So we talked about this during the Task and Finish group, and it was raised actually during that process. But also subsequently, we've had the benefit of spending some time at the depot and exploring some of their policies and procedures, and they have a system in place which is an employee assist scheme. It's widely known amongst the staff. We asked them themselves, and that's an anonymous system, which means that they can report issues, concerns, any morale or health and safety concerns that they have, and that's dealt with then through a formal process. I think it's also important to note that the last sort of 18 months there's been some concerns amongst the workforce about the ongoing pay negotiations, but I'm pleased to report that that has now been finalised and settled and that the pay negotiations have been concluded. So while that was an unsettling time and obviously did lead to some industrial action, what I would say is that the morale at the depot during that time has actually been really, really positive. And you will have seen yourselves that the working across the 3 depots has actually proved the resilience of the contract. So members of staff in the west that weren't affected by industrial action coming to support the depots in Breckland and in North Norfolk, which is really positive. The workforce during that time completed their duties and the contractual standards to the standard that were required. So there was very little service disruption, and actually that morale amongst the crews, which was experienced when Councillor Crane and ourselves went down to see how things were working on the ground, was actually really quite impressive and positive. In terms of the third action, that was around officers investigating localised reporting issues raised through the Task and Finish group to ensure that Serco are held to account for rectifying those issues and further issues as and when they arise. So the ones that were raised during the Task and Finish group, all of those were addressed at the time. All of the councillors who raised concerns or specific ward issues were written to with a full update. Some of those issues that were reported were not the responsibility of Serco, they were the responsibility of other agencies, and they were passed on accordingly. We continue to ask and encourage members to use the report it function on the website to make sure that any issues are directed through that function, which will get to Serco far quicker than coming through other channels which may be available to you. We've also received some really positive feedback from members about how quickly those issues are being addressed, and also from members of the public as well. What I would say is if you're not satisfied with the outcome, if you've raised an issue through that report it function, you're not satisfied with the outcome, you do have the ability, of course, to come through to the Environmental Services team using the generic email address, or to email Sarah and myself as well, and we'll make sure that they are escalated within Serco for you. The fourth action was that monitoring of the contract remains a priority and that the portfolio holder and officers report to overview and scrutiny periodically on matters relating to performance and quality, including any additional KPIs. So currently contract performance remains very high. The contract has seen a steady overall improvement across all areas. For example, the number of missed collections in May 23 is the lowest it has been since contract commencement. And this, I think it's important to note, was despite the strike action that took place during that month, so that's a really positive position to be in. Whilst members of the Task and Finish group had initially raised some concerns over the quality of grass cutting in the mobilisation year, the feedback has been extremely positive during the last cutting season and also the start of this season. Towns remain standard and compliant, and collections are consistent. We've also experienced some significant improvements in the call centre. Serco have learnt from the mobilisation phase of the contract and they've restructured their call centre accordingly. They've brought in some more supervision and some more training in that area, and the call handling is significantly improved. Whilst the implementation of the round reviews, which we did talk about during the Task and Finish group, did take a little bit of time to bed in. Obviously, I've mentioned that collections have remained consistent either on the collection day or within the rectification period, which is the following day. It should also be noticed that since the Task and Finish group, and relevant to the period that I'm talking about, the transfer station at Shibden has closed. That's obviously a county council procured function, and that closed at the end of March with not very much notice. So that has resulted in Serco having to bring additional resources in to make sure that the round's still complete and the material is shunted to alternative disposal points. That, coupled with strike action and lots of planning and logistics, is obviously challenging, but I think you'll agree that the service has had limited impact as a result of that closure. In terms of new service delivery, since the Task and Finish group met, WE collection, which is small electrical items, and battery collection has now been rolled out district-wide, 7 weeks ahead of when it was scheduled. During the last reporting period, there have been no health and safety issues, no riddles reportable on the Breckland part of the contract. And in May, there was a small RCV fire, which the crew dealt with very speedily, meaning everybody was safe and the vehicle was not damaged. So that was dealt with very efficiently. In terms of the wider point, which I know that you've emailed me about, Councillor Clark, is around that mapping system and the responsibility of grounds and grass. Clearly, we sent out maps to all councillors when Serco stopped cutting the county grass. Those maps are still available if you need a further copy. But we are also currently testing on the public website the Breckland land ownership layer on the web map. So that is available. We've done a bit of a soft launch because, as I said, we are still testing that, but there will be an email that comes out to all members in due course, which will give you instructions on how to use that. Clearly, that's just showing you Breckland land. We don't know who owns everything else necessarily, but those original maps that were sent out will identify county land versus Breckland land. Given the recent election, we've also sent those to all new councillors as well. So if anyone's got any questions or concerns or wants them reissued, please let us know. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Sorry, there was one more, wasn't there?
Encore.
Number 5, it was your one, Terry. That the online fly tipping report it function be prioritised. The digital team are aiming for the first release of this in Q2, which will include the fly tipping element. They've had some technical and resource issues which they've had to overcome due to the partners involved, the complexities and the bespoke design with technical architecture, meaning it has required some robust testing which has took longer than expected. Resources were also being used to deliver some of the other priority projects, such as the licensing public register, integration of licensing forms with Tascomi, Alexa skill development support, case management, online payments and website review.
Lovely.
But it's coming soon is the message.
I've heard that before.
They tell me Q2.
Brilliant, thank you. That sounds like a really positive update, to be honest with you, so really grateful for that. Linda, do you just want to follow up on that quickly?
just to say I had a message today to say I can ask my Alexa when my next bin is due.
Brilliant. Does anyone have any questions or comments, please? Peter?
Yeah, just a comment, Mr. Chairman. The crews are fantastic. In my patch, in our valley, we've had the odd resident who's quick to complain to me that they missed a bin. Well, no, that was because the round hadn't quite finished in one village, so there was a knock-on effect for the next village, but it's always been done the next day. Never noticed any disturbance through any strike action. No bins sitting on the streets for days and days and days. And like I say, the crews are very helpful and polite, so they do a cracking job.
Yeah, thank you. Noted. No, just a couple quickly from myself. I'm pleased to hear you talk about the report it function because it has been improving. There are still a couple of bits which could be further improved. My biggest bugbear and the biggest bugbear of residents is when you report something and it's not to do with Breckland, there is still an issue where Breckland don't go back to the person that's reported it to say it's not their land, this is what you should do. So nearly always when people say to me, I've reported this to Breckland, had an example last week, a lady reported broken glass, and I said, well, where is it? She said it's at a garage block. But she reported it to Breckland and she reported it again when it wasn't clean. And I knew straight away it wasn't a Breckland area, it was probably Flagship Housing Association. But nobody from Breckland went back to her to say, this isn't our land, this is what we should do. So we're getting a bad reputation, but it's not actually our fault. So I do think we need to tidy up a little bit on following up on reports. Is that likely to come in as part of this new arrangement?
Yeah, I believe it's all part of the same one that fly tipping will be in. It's that feedback loop.
Yeah, brilliant,
but
good.
I'll double check with the digital team.
Yeah, that'd be great. The map, when you do the pin drop online for Report It, the default is nearly always London. The odds are I'm reporting something to Breckland that's in Breckland. So I don't know if it's a software issue and that's why it has to be London, but...
Make it Little London.
Little London, yeah, we could do. Make it my ward, that'd be even better. No, but it's just a minor point, but it is a sort of bugbear. And then lastly, I'm really pleased to see the monitoring of the contract remains a priority. And as you mentioned, officers report to overview and scrutiny periodically. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but the only KPI that I can see in our regular performance report is around bin collection rates. Are there other KPIs, particularly I'm thinking around grounds maintenance and that sort of thing, that we should be particularly looking at and scrutinising moving forward to add to our performance management? Because I know you guys, there's all sorts of KPIs related to the contract, but there's only one that we actually look at. Should we not be, 2 or 3 to give us a flavour? Yep, Rob?
Chairman, we're in the process through Ryan and colleagues in his team of reviewing the performance indicators and performance matrix, and we'll bring in forward to both Cabinet and yourselves some choices about what you'd like to see is across all teams, but we have been looking at environmental services, both internal delivery and contract management. And I think there'll be a choice of what's useful information, what's a management KPI, and what's a KPI that the politicians want to look at, and we'll give you the choices for which you want to look at after it's been to Cabinet.
Lovely, thank you very much. Brilliant. Well, just from myself, I suppose on behalf of the Commission, we've bashed about the Serco contract for a while now, but I know both of you have persevered and actually taken us through a lot of those issues, and I certainly noticed an improvement in the performance, and a large part of that is because you guys have been very diligent at making sure that happens, so thank you. Helen, did you want to respond to that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I would just like to reiterate my thanks to both Rihanna and Sarah and the team for the sterling work they do. Thank you.
Lovely, noted. Brilliant, thank you. We'll move on to outside body feedback to receive an update from representatives on any outside bodies. Robert and then Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Since the election, I've had one HOSC meeting, the chairmanship of which was decided on the toss of a coin. Luckily, it was a two-headed Tory penny, but however, a positive outcome from what HOSC do, there had been a proposal to close the walk-in centre in Norwich, and that has now been saved within the existing procurement budget. And 3 districts have yet to appoint their new members to HOSC. However, one area which we've asked for a future work programme on is long COVID, which the ONS produced some quite detailed statistics on that very recently, but if anyone's interested, goes right down to small areas. And just for the benefit of new members, if they are interested in our joint museum service, please add the Area Museums Committee agendas to your ModGov. And of course, in addition to those members appointed, anyone else is welcome to attend. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, Robert. Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. QEH Governor feedback. As you're all aware, the QEH has now been put on the government's list for a new hospital, and hopefully will be built in the next 7 years or so. And thanks go to obviously 2 of our Norfolk MPs, Liz Truss and James Wild, for lobbying government, and they did use a lot of my information I passed on by email straight away as soon as I got information of serious issues at the QEH, like the wards being evacuated because of the roof and no use in the theatres. Just for information as well, just in case residents come to members, junior doctors across Norfolk are due to strike on the 14th of June to the Saturday the 17th of June, just for information there. The Breckland Yab, one of our funded projects, the Cup of Tea, which for new members, that's a wellness and therapy service. Breckland are going to again fund that again this year. It's going from strength to strength, and as you might have seen on the television, they had a grant of 75,000 from the ITV and National Lottery funding, which is going to help them introduce and promote more peer training. This is a vital service which was noted by myself. The gap was a big gap in the service, this mental health service, for families who went from when they're diagnosed with mental health issues to when they get their treatment. And this Cup of Tea is filling that gap. And I believe as well it is taking people away from having that national health care. The outside woodland and projects they introduce for young people and their families is helping with their mental health without having to sit in situ waiting for help. It's taken them off the list actually, and we've had recently 100 families had successful results. So it's well organised, well needed project. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Peter. It's a positive update. Any other outside bodies? Nope. We'll move on to item 12, scrutiny call-ins. I don't believe we have any, but the discussion we had about the infrastructure levy came from an item at Cabinet, so it was a call-in by another name. 13, councillor call for action. I don't think we have any councillor call for actions, but it's probably because we're a new council, a new term. I'm going to move on to the work programme, which is attached to the agenda. I'm keen to hear the committee's suggestions for items that you would like us to add to the work programme. I think it's important that all members of the Commission contribute and raise issues that are of concern to you. There's a list there at the moment, and I'm not clear which ones have had work already undertaken and which ones are very embryonic, shall we say. They're in name only. So we might want to review some of those and reprioritise them. So that's a job for me with the officers. But I'll take some suggestions to throw into the mix. I saw Harry first and then Roger.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm conscious, partly the work that myself and newly elected Councillor Callaghan and others have been doing in the ward around housing issues, but also that all members have now had a refresh of the housing stock through the different social providers across the whole district. I think it would be opportune to have all our providers back here probably no earlier than Q3, by which time new members and existing members will also have looked at things like housing allocation, gone through some of the induction, understood some of the issues in their patch. I know we've done this in the past. I found that useful, but I think going round with meeting a lot more residents recently over the last couple of months, I don't know about me, but I know others may find that useful to have both presentation, but also the questions about what you actually do, what the expectations are of both the tenants, but also that we've got those policies, but also issues that members may be concerned about. We've heard about adaptations, but there are other issues. I'm coming across quite a number of cases in social providers where there is mould and damp in properties. If it was just the odd one or two, and this isn't just related to one particular provider. So I think that I personally would find that helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that'd be useful. I remember when they came before and I thought that was a useful exercise. And I can whinge at them about void rates when they come, so that'd be useful. Roger and then Linda, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to get somebody down here from the Early Years Alliance and Norfolk County Council's Education / Preschool Department to talk about preschools in general in Breckland. Many of them are under acute pressure. There's been many, particularly in my ward, that have shut in the last few years. And there's also the issue regarding on planning, when we have a section 106 and Norfolk County Council asks for an education contribution, that doesn't include any contribution to preschools. It's primary and secondary education. A lot of the preschools are voluntary run. They're more often than not, they struggle for premises or adequate premises. I'd like to see how robust that sector is actually in Breckland. I think that's really important, because if we don't get the early years right, then we're just storing up problems for later in life. So I'd like to find out how the experts think it's going in the district, and what is there anything that we can do to assist through the planning system maybe, and also with our Norfolk Health and Wellbeing Partnership hat on. I think that would be a good piece of work to take account of. Thank you.
Okay, noted. Thank you. Linda, please.
Just to comply with the previous report on regular monitoring, so please could we have the Serco report back, I say within 12 months this time. Thank you.
Yep, that makes good sense. And I suspect we may have highways back in a similar time period as to see how next year's grass cutting goes. Peter.
Yeah, just for information, Chairman, which Councillor Roger here has just brought up, Section 106 agreement I had for Narborough School from a developer, and the school is in a group, but I made sure that we had the money because we had the development and what goes with developments in a village, and it went to the school, and that was for increasing capacity and facilities. And they didn't need, the numbers wasn't there to go up from the top age group. So they've went early years and they've got now having a nursery. So
yeah,
that's
in the school.
Yeah, but
they'll get funding for the school. They won't get funding if the preschool's not in the school. That's the thing I'm concerned about.
Well, I don't know if we'd have a control over that, but I'm saying, you know, the schools are helping like that, aren't they? So from my area now, all of a sudden I've got this problem that's gone away, which Roger mentioned.
Okay, no, that's fine. Well, I've made a note, and I think early years provision is key. So we'll see if we can get somebody along and we can ask those questions. Okay, so that's a good list. I'll work through the existing work programme and look at what we might be able to remove, look to add these bits. If anyone has any other points or suggestions, please do contact me. I'm quite happy to meet with members of the Commission to talk about particular issues or how we might be able to assist through the scrutiny process. So I'll park that one there for the time being. So the last item today is to note the date of the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 14th of September. Fabian?
We're not having one in July.
Well,
It is in the calendar.
well, I was trying to get my little computer to work here because I thought we had a meeting in July, but the Wi-Fi doesn't seem to be working. But the agenda does specifically say 14th of September.
Yeah, on the calendar of meetings it says the 20th of July.
That's what I thought. So I wasn't going to point that out because I thought I'd remembered it wrong. But Ruth and Rob will tell us if there is a July one.
Scheduled for the 20th of July, so we'll
Ah.
go for that one then.
Yes.
And that fits with the cabinet cycle, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's actually the 20th of... If you'd have kept quiet, Fabian, we'd have a day off, look. But I thought there was a July meeting. I certainly put it in my diary. So actually, ignore the agenda. The next meeting is the 20th of July. Thank you all for your contributions today. Very useful session, and I shall see you at the next meeting.